it's how you say it. You know,
It's
you got to
as
sell it a little bit.
right as Eric Clapton once said, it's in the way that you use it. So that being said, you basically had, because we're both fans of little inside baseball here. Bill and I are both fans of a great show from the '90s called the police drama from the '90s called Homicide: Life on the Street. For those of you that don't know what that show is, quick synopsis. It is one of the most underrated and one of the best cop shows ever made. It took place in Baltimore from 1993 to 1999 and it tracked the homicide division. And the reason I bring that up is because around season 4, season 5, you may remember Mike Kellerman, who was played by a great actor by the name of Reed Diamond. He's being implicated in something he didn't do, which is corruption involving his unit, which dealt with arson. And he had that point where he was just considering leaving the job, and he had this crisis of confidence, and Meldrick Lewis had to talk him down, to which he was able to stay in the unit. So, ultimately, I guess, at least you had people there that convinced you, like Lewis was able to convince Kellerman to stick around. And it worked out. I mean, even though Kellerman kind of had a shady exit from the show with the circumstances in season 6, I mean, it worked out. He was able to stay in Homicide, and you didn't have a shady exit. You stayed the course through your retirement in 2004. So I want to pivot to something really interesting that you got to be a part of during your career. So you were assigned to protecting the family of Mr. Edmund Safra. He was a billionaire banker and a whistleblower on a major money laundering scheme that involved the Russian mafia. We talked about Russians earlier. They were implicated in this, and he was killed as a result of an arson fire, ironically enough, on December 3rd, 1999. I think his bodyguard set it and to try to save him, and then backfired. Instead, he killed the guy he was supposed to protect. And Hassan al-Bolkiah, hopefully I'm pronouncing that name right, he's the longtime prime minister of Brunei. He didn't meet a tragic end, he just needed protection. But also, and this is a New York story because he was a New Yorker, the estate of John F. Kennedy Jr., who was also killed in 1999. He died in an infamous July 16th plane crash. And so these are major assignments, especially JFK Jr., who was, like I said, such a major figure in New York, had made his home in the city and lived in the city for years. So given that, kind of assignment, what are the main priorities in an assignment like that? And how did you even manage to get those details in the first place? Because this is really cool stuff.
Well, thank you for saying so. A&E was a great place to work, but, to be very frank, it wasn't very good for overtime, which is amazing because we had tons of press cases. We weren't making overtime. And, I got married, had the kid, and so I had to start working side gigs. And one of my old street crime partners, Eddie DeCorzia, had gone to a training center and met a guy from Kroll Associates. And through his relationship with this guy, David Irvin, I started working at Kroll. And Kroll was dealing with all kinds of, Fortune 100 people, a lot of big celebrities. And it was through my work in Kroll as a detail supervisor that I did things like the Kennedys and Edmund Safra, and it was fascinating work. It was a lot of times it was a lot more fun than my police work, but it was just the Kennedy thing was so amazing because when they brought us in, they hadn't found his body yet, and I don't want to say where he lived, but he lived in Lower Manhattan, and my boss from Kroll was there, and I had to bring another detective with me. I brought my late friend Carmen Figueroa, who died of 9/11 cancers. But she and I went there, and we had to set up security because they didn't want anybody coming in, and they didn't want anything coming in and out of the house. And it was just so bizarre when I went in the apartment. As an Irish Catholic myself, when you go in and you see things like door opens up and there's like the president's scrimshaw collection. There's pictures like we have of our families, and there's a picture of the president and the first lady, and it just, there's a pair of boxing gloves signed by Muhammad Ali, and then you go around and you see all these records he had on his table. Like, wow, we listened to the same songs, and you start realizing, some of the similarities you had, but it was just so bizarre to be there. But the thing that always struck me the most was the keys that we had to his house were on a key ring for the flight school that he attended in Florida. And on his desk was a book about instrument flying. So, and he said one of the things that might have contributed to the fatal airline crash was that he was flying at night, and I don't think he was as proficient flying with instruments as he would have needed to be, and that may have contributed to it. But it was just it was so bizarre. But then now the next day when they find him, all the press is there and the people are there dropping off flowers, and he was such a well-loved guy. And
Yeah.
and the funny thing is, I'm still a cop, and but I'm working side gigs for this. And now when you're having incidents like this, you're dealing with the big brass, but I'm not dealing with them as Bill Ryan, the detective. I'm dealing them with Bill Ryan, the private security for this company. And sometimes that gets a little antsy because
Yeah.
it's like, hey, listen, I'm not on your clock today. I'm on this clock, and it got antsy a couple of times with some of these things. So, who are you? Aren't you one of my detectives? Well, I am, and I will be at 3 o'clock. But right now,
you're working in a different capacity. And you mentioned JFK Jr. being such a likable guy. I don't know if it's on YouTube anymore, but there was this great interview that he did in May of 1998 with another late great legend, and that's Don Imus. He was on Imus in the Morning, and they were just talking casually about an article that JFK had written in his George magazine, which he had launched at some point in the mid 90s, 1995, I believe, which covered pop culture. And it was an okay magazine. I mean, I never read it, but it basically, from what I've read about it, it was a magazine that was only able to last as long as it did because of the fact that the guy that owned it was the son of John Kennedy. He was John F. Kennedy Jr. But anyway, they had him on. That's the thing I noticed. I'm like, you know what? Here's a guy that seemed comfortable, seemed easygoing, a likable guy, didn't carry himself with any arrogance, rode his bike to work, and he made the decision in a haste to try to, as you said, take that flight at night in July of '99, and the rest is tragic history. And one last note on that, I read a biography of Derek Jeter, and Jeter was living in Manhattan at the time. I don't know if he lived near JFK Jr., but anyway, JFK Jr. was regarded as the Prince of New York City. And after JFK died in the circumstances that he did, along with his wife and sister-in-law, a buddy that was living with Jeter at the time looks over at him and says, not in a mean-spirited way, but just honestly, well, you're the Prince of the city now. And that was the kind of sway that JFK Jr. had. So segueing back to you and your career, I mean, this is interesting. I'm a Law and Order. I mentioned this to Irma. I've mentioned this to Bill and Mark. I'm a Law and Order super fan, and I'm not just talking about one specific Law and Order franchise. I'm talking about all three. I love Criminal Intent, Special Victims, and the original. The original for me, extra preference because I love Jerry Orbach. He's my favorite actor ever. And you got to work on something in the summer of 2001, and this is going to segue into another question I'll be asking you that involved terrorism. And of course, summer of 2001 is notable because terrorism would hit New York City, as I mentioned earlier. And for you and the members of the arson, other members of the arson explosion squad, as well as the members of the bomb squad, this attack would hit close to home because you would lose one of your own, who we'll talk about momentarily. But this was interesting. You're writing, you're contributing to this plot that's going to merge the three franchises. Criminal Intent's about to start. Their season 1 in September of 2001. So why don't you dive into greater detail about just what this entailed?
Well, I before I was a cop, I did stand-up comedy. I wanted to be a writer. Still want to do screenwriting, and I contributed to some shows with some friends, and I just got lucky where the people in Law and Order reached out to Tom Sullivan and the Bomb Squad, and I don't know if they reached out to him directly, but Tom called me and said, "Hey, the guys in Law and Order are doing this terrorism bombing case. We don't want to talk to them. This might be a good thing for you since I was a film student that became a cop, so you speak their language, you might be able to contribute. Call these guys," and they end up hiring myself and Detective Tommy Buddha from Terrorist Task Force, and they were writing. It was just being written at this point. It was called Terror, the Law and Order miniseries. They were going to combine the three shows. It was going to be I don't know how they were going to put it together, but eventually it was going to be like terrorists were going to come over the border from Canada. They were going to throw in a sex crime to get the SBU guys involved, and then they were going to have bombings in New York City. And we spent months blowing up New York on paper. And we get notes back from NBC. No one will believe this. No one will believe this. And like some of the things they would put, like they had Ed Green's character, his brother was going to be a waiter in Greenwich Village, and the bomb maker was going to take a suitcase and put the bomb under the table he was waiting on and then walk out. And they're like, well, the bomb's going to blow up the restaurant. And the next scene, they've got the guy in the back of the neighborhood with a sketch artist. I'm like, listen, the bomb blew up like that. You know, everybody in that room is probably going to be dead. If they're surviving, they're probably blind and deaf. You know, and you're doing, you know, adding things to it that you could show them to make it more believable. And great, you know, I was working with them. And when you go on the sets now, my detective card is in all their Rolodexes. I put our unit patch on the wall, you know, did my my little markings. And the last day the last day we were working on it, and I'm in heaven. I mean, I've wanted to do stuff like this my whole life, and now I'm doing it. And the last day we were working on it was September 10th. September 11th was primary day in New York City. And myself and Tom Buda were very involved in our union, the Detective Endowment Association. We're involved in their political action committee. And our union was backing Peter Ballone's candidacy for mayor. He was the speaker of the city council at the time and represented the Astoria section of Queens. And they're like, here, let's take the script with you, make the notes on it, and come back the next day when you can, and we'll take it from there. And you know, the next day, obviously, we're all getting ready to. We're all getting. I still get emotional about it. We all get ready to get our assignments to do the stuff for Peter Malone on the morning of September 11th. We're at Russo's on the Bay, which is a catering hall in Howard Beach, and you know, we're sitting there getting our assignments. I'm sitting next to another detective, Alan Campbell, friend of mine, and my pager goes off. It's my wife. It was the text pager I had, and she said, "Oh, a plane hit the Trade Center." And I'm looking at it. I'm like, not that I was discounting it. I think, oh, probably a Cessna or some smaller, you know, aircraft. You know, so I'm writing down my assignments. Next thing you know, she says another plane hit the other tower, and you know, now all the pages are going off. We're all watching this, and I remember there was the men's room in the place had a men's room attendant. He had this tiny little TV. You know, it was maybe a little bit bigger than a smartphone that he was watching his shows on. We put on the news, and we're all crowding into the men's room and watching this all go on. And somebody said, "Hey, let's go on the roof." And went to the roof of Russo's, and there we see the towers in flames and the smoke coming. And you know, I came down. Paul DiGiacomo, who's now the president, he was the vice president then. Hey, Paul, got to go, and told him what was going on. And I left, and pretty much everybody started going to their cars and heading into Manhattan. By the time I get into Manhattan, the towers had already fallen. Probably, you know, the traffic and they trying to get in, it was just nuts. But
Yeah.
you know, I kept thinking about all the people I knew that were there, and you know, it's such a populated area in the daytime. You know, there's not as many residential areas, but it's in that time of day in the business, you know, you get a lot of people commuting, coming back and forth, and you know, I just knew we were going to have mass casualty event, and it just, you know, and knowing that I knew so many people that worked in the building, I'm like, oh my God. Here's something else. My wife's from Scotland, and she had family that was visiting, and they were planning on going to.
Hang on, because I don't mean to interrupt, but your phone vibrated there for a second. You said your wife was from where?
My wife's from Scotland.
Oh, okay. My apologies.
And she had family in from Scotland, and they were going to do, you know, all the New York touristy things, and they were actually considering going to the Trade Center that morning.
Mm.
And you know, I'm eternally grateful that they didn't. But you know, we all lost somebody down there. You know, and, you know, I lost, you know, cop friends. I lost civilian friends. Where I lived in Bay Ridge, a lot of people worked. Counter Fitzgerald worked there, and, you know, so I mean, my neighborhood in Bay Ridge, I mean, we got decimated. You know, Morris Smith lived there. You know, we grew up with her. You know, hundreds of people I could name that you know were people who worked in finance and did different tasks in the building. It was like I said, from the '93 bombing, I'd made friends and relationships with a lot of people, and you know, they all passed. You know, none of them got out of it. ripped the soul out of the city. It really did.
Yeah, of course. And Jimmy Carano talked about it. He wasn't on this show. He was talking about it in a separate interview that he was doing. I think the president of in Gramercy Park was putting these various videos together in the aftermath. Just various ESU squads remembering their friends that they had lost, and the bomb squad they interviewed about Danny, who for those of you listening, you'll hear more about tomorrow about Detective Danny Richards when I chat with his partner. But Jimmy Carano was saying that he was getting a Detective of the Month award from his union. And that same thing that you described earlier, there's a bunch of beepers going off. And he thought the same thing. Oh, it's a Cessna, probably nothing. It's, a small plane. But, I think it was Michael Mixon that was also featured in that video that described when he and Detective Kevin Barry made the turn onto Washington Street.
Yeah.
And you could see the buildings clearly. They looked at each other and they said, this is not a small plane. And obviously it came at a great cost. Members of the bomb squad came in, and you'll hear more about that tomorrow. And it culminated with the loss of a good man amongst many good men and women that were lost that day. And Detective Claude Richards, who was off duty when this happened, like many cops and firemen were. And you talked about it ripping the soul out of the city. How does one, because so many guys retired after that from the fire department and from the NYPD and from the Port Authority Police, and who wouldn't after seeing what you had to see that day? I told this to Mark DeMeo, I don't think the most experienced person could have been ever prepared for what they had to endure and witness that day, no matter where you were. You didn't have 20 years yet, but what made you, especially coming to the unit and knowing how many people you lost, as you said, cop friends and civilian friends, what made you even want to still come to work after something like that?
Mike, at the very, very beginning, you want to hope against hope that you're going to find somebody, and that's what motivates in the beginning. And when you're digging through it and you think you're going to find that one person that's alive, one person that you can save, one person that you can reunite the family, you do it for that. And a couple of days into it, when it wasn't a search and rescue anymore, it was a search and recovery. It broke me. I'm still not over it.
Blame you. I don't blame you. I could see it. I could see the raw emotion. I mean, even almost 20 years later, I think anybody that was there, it sticks with you,
Mike, it was yesterday.
Yeah.
And it's always going to be yesterday. That's why I get so like on Friday when, you watch all the news, nobody did anything on the 93 bombing anniversary.
I noticed that it would have been just a blurb. I mean, not even that. I mean, if they do something, it's a 6-second hit, hit at worst at best, where it's oh, by the way, this happened in 93.
You don't even get that, and but you heard all about Lady Gaga's dogs, and I remember saying this, and that I said back when it was still a fresh thing with the bombing, where I said, what. This is probably going to be like Pearl Harbor, where, we all remember it happened. Nobody denies it happened. But me talking about the 93 bombing is like veterans talking about who lived through World War II, talk about, Pearl Harbor. It means something to the people that lived through it. Everybody else, it's, a mark in a history book. But, the city's never recovered from it. And it's like I said a moment ago. I mean, tore the soul out of the city, and we're still healing. But the problem is, people are still sick and dying. I mentioned my friend Carmen Figueroa. She got sick there. She passed, and Zadroga and all these other. I mean, there's so many. My friend John Christophers. I mean, I knew guys that died that day, but I know a boatload of guys and gals who died after.
Ronnie Richards. Ronnie Richards from the bomb squad got sick and died.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's another one.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many to name, and I don't want to take up the show doing that, but I mean, it's it's funny too. It's people loved the cops, because they needed us, and the firemen, and everybody wanted to be with us, and I see how that's deteriorated into now, defund the police, and um, I wonder who people think are going to be around when the next big event happens. I remember saying to my father in '93, my father's a retired policeman, said, wow, here's the '93 bombing. I got to play the Super Bowl in my first season. What's bigger than this? And he's like, listen, something always bigger and worse ends up happening. And
He was
I
right.
couldn't imagine something like 9/11 or the scale of that.
There's a chapter in a book, and it's the last note on that, and we'll move on. But there's a chapter in the book I read about the bomb squad. That's part of the reason why Sadawi will be coming on soon, and McNally tomorrow. And the night before the chapter is called, I kid you not, and it's called Good Night, Danny, because that is the words that Tony Bondilillo, who was a sergeant at the time, said to Danny Richards when he was leaving the office that night to go home. And Tony, he's spitballing with Sergeant Walsh, I believe, who, they're saying, what would it take for you to retire? And Tony points at the picture of what happened in '93 and says it would have to be bigger than that. And the next day it was. So goes to show you never know, but you need a few good men and women who are able to charge into the scene and help. And that's what you did. And that's what a lot of great men and women did, some at the ultimate cost. So you retired in 2004 after 20 years. I mean, I imagine that had to play a role in your decision to step away, but there's other factors too. I mean, Bill Cannon talked about getting sick of the bureaucracy, and that was his moment when he knew, yeah, it's time to go. But for you, what was the moment? Because the light bulb always goes off above a cop or a fireman's head, especially in New York, where you said to yourself, I've had my fun. Let me just put in my papers and move on.
It wasn't a thing. I think, like Bill said, it's usually, several things. And one of them was I developed lung problems after the '93 Trade Center bombing. And I gotten sick, and I was in treatment for a good part of a year. And I wasn't sure if they were going to force me out and retire me out. And I was really upset about it because it was a big professional goal for me to become a first grade detective. And I was still a second grade detective, and I said, you can't get promoted while you're on sick report. And I'm like, I'm going to get better. I'm going to come back. I'm going to do this. And the job was great about letting me take sick time, and I got some great doctors. I'd actually broken this wrist on the pile, and I had taped it up and kept working. And like a month later, when it got bad, I had to actually go to the hospital with special surgery, and one of the police surgeons chewing me out, and I recognize it now as probably post-traumatic stress, but he was yelling at me, and I'm like, what do you think, you're a hero? And I'm like, are you kidding me? Who are you to talk to me like this? And I think a lot of that played onto it. But Mike, not to be negative about it, but I always had a love-hate relationship with the police department. My time at A&E, there was several times I was going to leave. One time after the '93 bombing, we talked about our mutual friend, John Mulrooney, who's a good friend of mine. He's a stand-up comic, and he's also a police officer upstate. And John was working in Hollywood. He was doing a lot with Tim Allen, and doing a lot of the show warm-ups for Home Improvement and all those TV shows. And he'd met a guy who was producing shows for CBS, and he got me. I guess he was talking to a guy. Hey, I was at a party, and my friend just did the Trade Center, and hey, you think you want to do a book? You think you want to do a movie? And he goes, oh, call him up, and he called me up, and we talked about it, and I elected not to do it, mostly because I didn't have enough time to vest, and I was worried about, well, if it doesn't go well, and I leave the department, you can't write factually about what you do while you're a member of the department. Once you retire, you can do whatever you want, but but it was something that I wanted to do. I wanted to go into that world and do that, and that was a big thing for me. And I kept seeing different opportunities to leave and do other things. I'd always worked in the private sector. I was doing well with Kroll. I knew I wanted to be in the private sector doing the work. And you get a lot of opportunities, and it's like, maybe it's time to go. Maybe this is a sign. I got my time in. I'd been promoted detective first grade. I was only detective first grade for about a year when I left, and I formed a PI shop with another retired detective, and he was like, "Look, are we going to do this or not?" And I said, "All right." I committed to it. Let me leave. I mean, I always go back and say I regret leaving, but my wife and my brothers are like, "Listen, when you were getting ready to go, you were ready to go." And a lot of it too is, it's bureaucracy, certainly,
Yeah.
But I mean, I think like Bill, everybody says, when it's time to go.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that's
Every
great.
time.
You hear professional athletes talk about it. You got to know when to walk off the field. And there's days I regret it. I mean, if you said would I rather go back, because also it was a glamorous place to work. I enjoy being on television. You can tell, and being in an arson squad, you're always on TV. You're always in the papers.
Yeah.
One of the things that my wife had said was, the hardest part for you is going to be being anonymous anymore. You like the fact that reporters know your name. You like the fact that, you're on TV and, people see you and recognize you. And it's
Hollywood Bill Ryan.
It's funny. I didn't realize when I was in a bagel store one morning and I go, "You're the bomb guy." I lived in Bay Ridge. It was a big cop fireman neighborhood. So, there was a certain amount of celebrity you had in that. But, it was just, there was nothing left that I had not, I'd become a first grade detective. I had done, I'd done serial cases, which I really enjoyed doing. It's also too, the other things coming in, like Mark Torrey had made lieutenant and became our commanding officer in Arson Explosion Squad. And he eventually, when Jerry Sheehan left the bomb squad, Mark went back, and we didn't have a new lieutenant yet. I didn't know who we were going to get. I'm like, I'm a tough guy to supervise. I mean, I think even, Pete Pranzo will tell you, I'm a good guy, I do good work, but I'll make you nuts. And I won't say
you were the Mike Logan of real life NYPD.
Wasn't it Mike Logan? Okay.
Because I remember there's a scene Cragen talks about. If you ever watched the Law and Order movie Exiled, where Logan, he gets banished to Staten Island for punching a politician, and Cragen, there's a great scene. He's talking with him underneath the Brooklyn Bridge. He's like, "Now I'm listening to this tape because Cragen's working, I think, in CCB at the time, and they mentioned Logan, and I can't be thinking to myself. I think to myself, well, that can't be Mike Logan. But then I remember all those years you made me nuts in the head of the 2-7. I say to myself, of course it is.
Of course it's Mike Logan. It's I got to meet Chris Noth, not anything to do with Law and Order, just walking down. I've met so many of the actors on that show I've met just walking down the streets. But I always like to think I was more like Gorin, but not that I'm like any of the characters, but I'm probably closer to Gorin than anyone else.
Mm-hmm.
It was a great experience, and the grass is always greener, and you start looking at opportunities, and we were getting offered some contracts, and I was like, maybe I should go now.
Yeah.
And when Mark Torrey had left, I didn't know who we were going to get. Nobody knew who we were going to get, and I'm like, do I really want to break in another boss at this stage of my life? Because I mean, you might get a great guy, you might get a guy who's not a great guy, and I just didn't think I had the strength to go through breaking in another boss. But it's funny, when Mark came in, I knew Mark was a sergeant in the bomb squad, and Mark did a lot of the training, and one of the many great things about my friend Mark Torrey is when he came into A&E, he knew what he didn't know, and he trusted the guys in the squad who did know what they were doing to take him and show him and how to do the case. And what we had the case, probably the first big thing where I knew I could trust him and work with him was we had the case of the guy that blew up the cop's house in Montague Street, and he had only been in the squad a short time, and we were having dinner, and most of the squad had gone home, and his initial instinct, because he was in the bomb squad for so long, was to go to the scene and deal with the scene. And I'm like, listen, we're not those guys anymore. The bomb squad guys are those guys. The guy that got blown up is at the hospital. We have to go talk to them. And I said, listen, here's how we're going to do this. Here's why, here's how. And you've got to trust that I know this, and I'll get you through there. And
Right.
he's a formidable guy, super smart. Uh, you know, we did a lot. We couldn't have solved that case without his input, because it was a very sophisticated device, and his assistance was invaluable in it. As a bomb, because Mark's a bomb tech as well. I'm not a bomb tech. I know certain things that people like John Santos, who are bomb tech, and Mark, and Don Sadawi, and the people that you work with teach you this, and you learn some of it by locking up guys that do this, and they tell you how to make them. But I saw right there that Mark was going to be a great choice, and very excited. We did some great cases together. I made him crazy all the time, but we did some great stuff together. And he said, do I I got lucky. I had Jerry Sheehan, I got Mark Torrey. Who am I going to get next? And I didn't want to do 3 on a match.
Well, I've kept you long enough, and this has been a great conversation. And I can't thank you enough for coming on. It's everything that I thought it would be. And this is, of course, part 1 of Tales from the Boom Room, a miniseries within the Mike to New Haven podcast. And it is now time. If you watch my interviews, and you have with Mark and Bill and Irma, I do a segment at the end of every podcast, which is called Rapid Fire. And it's 5 hit and run questions from me and 5 answers from you. So are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. So first, you mentioned a few of them. Favorite colleague or colleagues that you have worked with throughout your 20 years?
Wow.
You could say multiple.
Well, I'll tell you. I'll talk about the ones that had impact on me. Certainly, Pete Pranzo.
Mm-hmm.
My boss in street crime. Helped get me my investigative assignment. I wouldn't have become a detective or achieved what I did without him. Certainly, Mark Torrey, Jerry Sheehan, who brought me into A&E without any experience. John Santos. I worked for John for 13 years. Great friend, great boss. One of those guys you say, thank God, is on our side.
Yeah.
In terms of detectives, my partner Eddie DeCorzia certainly was a big help to me in Arson. In street crime, as well as getting me hooked into Kroll. My mentor, Tom Nerney, the detective I aspired to be. I certainly fell miles short, but in the struggle to achieve that, it's just a great guy. Marino Di Cristina, the ultimate gay. He taught me a lot about dealing with people, how to pull things out of people with a smile, and so they don't even know they've told it to you. And that I've had the fortune. There's so many guys that are all going to be angry at me not mentioning them. Kevin Perret, John Faust, Amadeo Pulley, Kevin McManus, Joe Gallagher. There were so many great guys I worked with. Jimmy Harkins, Greg Boyle, Joe Bisonia. There's so many guys you work with. So much for rapid fire, huh?
I don't care. I'm not strict here. We're not strict on the Mike to New Haven podcast. So second, you mentioned obviously being a stand-up comic. If you had to rank them 5 through 1, top 5 favorite comics ever.
Top comics ever?
Yeah.
Let's see.
For you personally.
For me, of course, George Carlin.
Yes.
Was a great comic. Richard Pryor, amazing. For contemporaries, Eddie Murphy. But people don't consider Groucho Marx to be a comic. And it's, he did movies, and like Watch You Bet Your Life. I think Groucho is the greatest comic wit of all time. I'm going to throw in my friend John Mulrooney, because even though I've heard his act how many times, I still laugh at it. And that's, it's the way he delivers it. It turns out little Mulrooney's. Of course, my friend John DeResta, another great comic. And I'm also going to throw in Stephen Wright, because I think he's so original. I love his delivery. I love his tone. I think he's got great ability.
Every time you mention Eddie Murphy, I think of his brother, his late brother Charlie, who was hilarious in his own right. I still laugh at those Chappelle Show skits where, the line that I always find myself saying is, he's a habitual line stepper. That it still cracks me up, and I've seen that Rick James skit 1,000 times. So third, during your patrol years, you respond to obviously a lot of dangerous situations, but New York City's filled with a lot of characters. What was the funniest call you ever responded to?
Probably stuff I couldn't put out here.
A clean thing.
I'm trying to edit it so I give you something clean, but
You could say pass if you want.
yeah, let's pass.
All right, that's fine.
I don't think you keep it PG.
That's fine. I understand. I appreciate it. So second to last question, fourth. Like I mentioned, we're both Homicide Life on the Street fans. If you had to rank your favorite characters across the 7 seasons of the show, give me your top. We'll both do our top 5. So first, your top 5.
Frank Pembleton, my favorite TV cop of all time, the best. That show is the standard. That is the only show I've ever watched and said, I do that.
All right, so he's your favorite.
The best. The
yes,
best.
I think he's the best. Yeah, for me, love Pembleton, but if I had to rank him 5 through 1, I think Lieutenant Giardello goes in number 5. Number 4, Tim Bayless. Number 3, I loved Mike Kellerman. I thought Mike Kellerman was fantastic. I think he was a mixture of Dirty Harry, but he always meant well, and he was kind of the loose cannon of the unit, if you will. Number 2, I got to put Frank at number 2 because number 1 is John Munch. I love John Munch. John Munch makes me laugh, man. And I got to put him number 1 all time. So fifth and finally, knowing what you know now and having the career that you've had both in the private sector and the NYPD, if you can go back in time and give advice to a younger version of Bill Ryan, what would you tell Bill?
Study.
Good advice.
It was, I taken and failed my first. I taken passed my first police sergeant's test, but I died on the list, and I never put the effort in. Although Pete used to beat me up about it, Pete Pransley used to beat me up about it. Study. And, even when you're a first grade detective, you're getting paid at lieutenant's rate and money, but detective is discretionary rank. On TV, it looks like the detectives order everybody around, but we're just our civil service title is police officer. Detective is discretionary rank. When you're a boss, you're a boss, and I see that a good boss, again, like Pete, they can take guys and help their careers and help mold them and help get people justice. And I wonder how much more I could have done if I had rank and authority. So I'd say study.
Good advice for anybody in any field. So that concludes what's been a really terrific episode of the Mike to New Haven podcast. I'm very, like I said, I was really excited for this week, and Bill Ryan came on and delivered the goods. So, Bill and Mark, if you're watching this, I'm still poaching all your guests. I apologize, but I'll return the favor. I'll get you some of my guests on your show too. And before we leave, Bill, let's plug ourselves. What do you want to promote?
I'm right now a Ryan Investigative Group. We're a PI firm. We do a lot of work with intellectual property, but we also do fire investigations. We do criminal defense work, find missing people, and Ryan Investigative Group, 347-417-1610. We're all over social media, Facebook, Ryan Investigative Group, LinkedIn, Instagram. Go on, like us, say hello, ask us questions, and thanks for the opportunity to come on, Mike. I appreciate it.
I appreciate it, Bill, and I'll plug myself, and then we'll get out of here. If you happen to be listening to this episode, to my show for the first time because you came for Bill, stick around. I'd love to have you. Of course, we mix it up here on this show. It's not specifically law enforcement related. I call it the Swiss Army knife of podcasts. We interview folks from the sports world, the news world, the fire service. I'm going to have a guy on soon that did 20 years in Rescue 1 with the FDNY that I'm looking forward to. So basically, my personal interest, it plays out here in the form of what I like to consider a really good guest like my guest today. So if you're listening for the first time, please subscribe, leave a 5-star rate and review, subscribe on all the podcast platforms, wherever you get them, we're there. And of course, on YouTube, I'm MC's Audio, MC''S Audio. And, if you want to see more, a video version of my podcast, you can go there. So like I said, this is part 1, Tales from the Boom Room with Bill Ryan. And tomorrow, please come back because I'm going to be interviewing retired NYPD bomb squad detective Danny McNally. So on behalf of Bill Ryan,
Great
It's
guest.
thank you. I'm looking forward to it very much. So on behalf of Bill Ryan, I'm Mike Cologne, and we will see you next time.